Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, make sure you go ahead and check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your order using that code Omnipoke. For today's video, we are going to be doing a cube review of the new set Fusion Strike. Now, we have done our massive set review for the standard format, but I am also going to be starting to do reviews for other aspects of the TCG. So for example, today will be Cube. I'm also going to be doing a sort of impact of Fusion Strike for the Gym Leader Challenge format, which is another great fun format, and the expanded format, which isn't really supported right now on TCG Live, and isn't we don't really have any confirmation of events of expanded right now. But I know these are still loved aspects of the TCG, so we will be looking at how Fusion Strike changes all of those things, starting today with Cube. So let's jump into it. First of all, we're going to talk about some new supporter cards that could be coming in. Cube is one of these really abstract things where every cube is different. So I'll be talking about lots of different things like power levels and this, that, and the other as we go. But for now, I'll start off with supporters. And Cook seems like a really nice addition to Cube. Very similar to Pokemon Center Lady. So you can really gauge its power level like straight away, pretty much 1-to-1. Obviously, the upside of PCL is that you can remove status conditions that can be varied between cubes of how important that would be. But Cook does seem to be on a similar power level, at least in the healing aspect. So that seems very decent. Of course, it also has to be active, so a small downside compared to PCL there. But yeah, Cook seems okay. Schoolboy and Schoolgirl, obviously trash in standard, but there are a lot of like draw 3 style supporters that go into mid-low power cubes and survive there, and I think the school children can be okay here. I actually think Schoolgirl is stronger than Schoolboy because I would prefer to be able to draw 4 cards in the early game when you have 6 prizes, or when your opponent has 6 prizes, than the Schoolboy. But more or less they like average out as just draw 3s, but with a bit of extra like playability in terms of how your opponent has to figure out when to get the maximum value or just to cash in on the 2 cards. So a bit more interesting perhaps than a Hop or a How. So may find their way into mid-low power. And then Sydney's interesting. Some cubes do choose to keep an eye on control, and Sydney obviously has that element to it. Even just regular decks may look towards this sort of card if there is a good amount of special energy in the cube. If there are some stadiums that you want to sort of keep in check or just win stadium wars yourself, Sydney could find a way. I feel like it's not really a supporter that I would draft myself very often unless I was teetering down that control pathway, because of course, well, there are some synergistic cards where you can look at your opponent's hand to make the most of Sydney. So you may just want to warp the cube itself to have some synergies with these styles of supporters. If you have this Yell Grunt, or sorry, Skull Grunt, I should say, and a few other of those style of supporters, it could be interesting to see. And if you're someone that likes having control as an element in their cube, Sydney could be a nice include. Let's have a look at some trainers. Cramomatic is an interesting one because we know that things like Comp Search are some of the strongest item effects in the game. Now, Cram is a coin flip straight away, which makes me very nervous, and you actually don't draft that many item cards in Cube, even if you weight items heavily in the draft itself. Like, outside of Ball Search cards and, like, recovery cards, there aren't many things that you can just throw away with Cramomatic, so really high-risk, high-reward style card. Getting to pick anything from the deck is crazy though, so if you inbuild some like redundancy in Ball Search or something like that into your draft, I could see Cramomatic making it into my decks even though it may be something that gets passed around a little bit late and could be a meme card that people are afraid to use. I think it could be a really interesting one to have, so I might experiment with this in some of my drafts, see how it goes. I'm skeptical of how good it would actually be, but if you're the one really building around Cramomatic, like if you have Cramomatic in like your opening round of packs or first 2 packs or something, then you can just like casually pick up more situational trainer cards in general, well, item cards, and put them into your deck, knowing that you could potentially have that big upside of Cram, because tutoring any card is really, really good in Cube, especially if it's on an item. So that's an interesting one I want to see about. I don't think it goes into like a lot of cubes, though, especially ones that are more heavily weighted to supporter cards. The cross switcher and cross receiver are these sort of two play at once effects. And I know some people like to draft with the likes of Puzzle of Time, with the likes of Custom Catcher, Poker Blower, Poker Drawer, those sorts of things. These add into the mix potentially. Cross Switcher being really, really strong, obviously comparable with the customs. I think it's weaker than customs in Cube, but the extra switch effect is really nice, so bear it in mind. And Cross Receiver seems like actually pretty okay in Cube. It feels really bad in Standard. But when you have some really important supporter cards and even like your most important like line topper or level X or something like that, Cross Receiver could be worth the double spend to get a key Pokemon back. So I think even these aren't the worst. Obviously, it's down to you if you want to have like lots of these in here and you can draft one at a time, or it's that situation where you draft one and then you receive the other copy for free during your gameplay, something like that. So yeah, interesting cards if you're someone that likes to play these duo options in here. And then Battle VIP Pass is also pretty interesting. Obviously, there's that huge upside of getting 2 basics on an item search. That's really nice. And then it makes some supporter cards look a lot better. Obviously, it depends on what your turn 1 rule set is, if you can use this VIP pass or not. So for some people, this will just be a no-go straight away. But if you can, like, Skylar, Green's Exploration, Karina, even lots of item search effects get way better by having a VIP pass. So I can see it just being a draftable card. Again, it could go around the tables and there'll be drafts where it's just completely useless and doesn't make it into decks. And then there'll be times where people are really happy to see VIP pass because they were also able to draft like a couple of these key supporter cards that can tutor out an item like this and get a huge upside. There aren't a lot of like Pokemon basics that tutor out item cards. That would be something that I sort of look for to make a VIP pass like more interesting in Cube. So something to bear in mind. I feel like it's a card that is probably going to be overvalued as a drafted card. It feels like a bait card for me, and it's probably going to end up in like the latter stages of packs for the most part. But it will feel really bad if your friend just happens to put it into their deck because they had nothing better to put in and then get this huge high roll situations. So yeah, pretty interesting one for sure. On some helpful basics, Pyukumuku just seems really nice. I like that its Knuckle Punch doesn't do like a huge amount of damage, so this can go into a variety of power levels just for that pitch of Pyukumuku. Could be really broken for some abilities that have like Pokemon search style effects every turn, because you could just like constantly get an extra draw 1 from the Pyukumuku and it would make itself an engine. For example, I have Fluorescent Venusaur in my high power cube as my grass line, and adding a picture of Pyukumuku makes that then a draw engine throughout the entire game, and that's just pretty insane. Obviously, it's once per turn, but it then turns this Fluorescent to not become a useless card. It feels like a very, very strong combo, so it could breathe life into these sorts of abilities. And personally, my Venusaur deck, or my Venusaur line, needs a card like this to give it a little bit of an extra push. Because as good as Fluorescent is in like the early game to build up your strategy, it does fall off compared to some of the other abilities that I have. And now this Pyukumuku is actually like a saving grace for that card, and I think a big card that you'd want to pick up as a Venusaur player. So I'm really happy with that. Just an example, of course, but there are tons of other abilities out there that search for Pokemon. Think about Delta Nidoqueen, for example. Pitch of Pyukumuku would also be insane there. Indeed is a nice one, even if it is just a basic Pokemon. The one thing I would say, like, I can compare this to like an Azelf. There's an Azelf that can get lots of psychic Pokemon in play for a psychic cost. And it has like a dangerous spreading style attack. So if you're worried about the spread that the Azelf could go to, you could switch to Indeedee, which would be nice. Heart Sign 80 for 3 is fairly high, so I think, and the 100 base is really high, so I think this is like a medium high power cube basic if you really want it. The one thing that puts me off the Indeedee is that it's a psychic costing call for family, which means there's not a lot of contesting of it by players around the table. It's really down to the people who actually want to splash in psychic at any point in the game into their deck that will even look at this card, and a lot of people will just ignore it unless you naturally have a lot of like Holland's Pokemon, for example, to try and get this attack cost going. But something to bear in mind. Seems pretty okay here. Dunsparce seems really good, especially if you have attacking colorless Pokemon. I know a lot of the time the colorless get shoehorned into just being support roles, like Pidgeotto into Pidgeot and Porygon-Z and that sort of thing. But if you actually turn them into attacking threats, this can be really nice. And I think it actually covers a huge issue that we have inherently in Cube, is that fighting Pokemon typically hit for too many weaknesses. If you have Lightning, Dark, and Colorless Pokemon, for the most part, fighting is hitting those for weakness. Obviously, not if you're a flying types, but if your Colorless line is, for example, that Porygon, this Dunsparce is going to make that sort of weakness map a lot less scary. So that's really cool. And again, for a control player, if you are adding in like gurus and other Pokemon like that, it gives them more survivability. So it could be an interesting one of there, and I think it's pretty cool. Obviously, it's low enough hit points and not high enough damage to be a problem in other in sort of any power level really. And Smiggle I'll only mention because of the cross switches and cross receivers. If again you're someone that likes having a control package in your cube, the Sketching Trash could be a way that you could loop Gust, or a way that you could loop supporters via the cross receivers. So if that's something that you like having in your cube, Smiggle's an interesting option for sure, and is probably much fairer than Oranguru. So if you just want to have that option for control, but it not to be like super oppressive, Sketching Trash and the switcher receiver package could be more interesting than just having like Guru getting any random 3 cards at any point with a chunky 120 hit point Pokemon. Now onto some of the more popular evolution lines. I wanted to throw out these cards because it's like as we gain extra cards, it makes these sort of like semi-popular lines much more of an option. And I think Butterfree is right on that precipice now with the new Butterfree that we get from this set. I think it's starting to challenge the likes of Beedrill as like a mid-low power option. I think probably this new Butterfree is on that upper mid side, whereas some of these other Butterfrees maybe on the mid-low side. So trying to balance that out is going to be interesting. And of course, you don't have to be singleton. You could play 2 copies of Tricolored Scales or like 1 copy and have lots of the other ones if you want to balance in whatever way you like. But I do always like looking at how new cards being introduced makes like the rest of the line more interesting. And there becomes a bit of a theme with Butterfree specifically, with the Rebel Clash Butterfree that we got. It has the Burn, Poison, Confuse, as does the Tricolored Scales. This really is a crazy ability. It's similar to like an Obstagoon really, where you get the 30 damage straight away. And the confusion comes into effect. Obviously, if your status conditions are being played from older rule sets, it makes it slightly less impactful immediately on the board, but could balance out that ability actually, because the ability is really good, and 2 for 90 is super duper scary actually for like mid power. Personally, I'm like a real hater of Beedrill in Cube because it forces the drafter of Beedrill to go tunnel vision, because they have to draft as many Kakuna, as many Weedle, and as many Beedrill as they see, and they basically have to sacrifice a ton of consistency. And I like cards like Butterfree instead because they sort of stand on their own 2 feet, and even if you get like 1 or 2 Butterfree and like a 2/2/2 line, I could still see myself playing this card because it's efficient and strong in its own right. It doesn't need anything else to prop it up. And there are also a ton of interesting like Caterpies, Metapods that all have like evolution cheating style abilities, which I think makes the line pretty interesting and will have a different feel to most of the grass types. So I think Butterfree could be pretty cool. I think its power level is similar, like I said, to Beedrill, maybe similar to Sceptile as well, where we're at. But there's a variety of interesting things going on here. There's healing options from these 2 guys. There's energy acceleration options, and again, some more status and just sort of cheap, efficient damage in here. I can see if you do go heavy on Tricolored Scales, this could even make it as like a high power cube card. If you really lean into this as much as possible and stick to current status rules. And if you do want it to be high powered, then you just jam pack the cube with the great Caterpies and the great Metapods, rather than like splashing in some of the older ones as well that just have like search options. Interestingly, the current Caterpie has just grab yourself another Caterpie, which is also okay. So you can have more of these types of Caterpie than the Pupate ones if you want to bring it back to like a mid power and then just have like 1 Emerge, 1 Pupate in your draft for those sort of high roll moments. So yeah, Butterfree is certainly an interesting one. Onto the fire stuff. Ninetales is like an absolute classic stage 1 fire support Pokemon. Bright Look is fairly balanced gusting ability. And Barrier Shrine is also can find its way into a ton of decks if you have lots of synergistic stadium cards. Roast Reveal is an absolute classic for a ton of the stage 2s out there. It finds its great partnership with the likes of Delphox, Typhlosion, even Infernape, these sorts of options. Ninetales is great as a support in all of those instances. The Hex Ninetales is kind of okay. It can be fairly high power, similar to the Hex Flame, where you have this little mini status package. If you are going to be adding in some grass type Pokemon for some inter-type synergy, those can be really nice for inflicting status on people. But this new Ninetales just seems absolutely great. And what I really like about the card is it only interacts with fire energy rather than fire Pokemon. And that's one thing I always find with Ninetales, like specifically for Roast Reveal, obviously. It basically always just goes into the fire deck with the fire attacker. So a lot of people just ignore the Ninetales. It's not quite as versatile as like Delcatty, for example, which loads of people can test. Ninetales basically finds its way to the fire guy a lot of the time, and this is like a big selling point. And although by way of the Nine-Tailed Fox is an ability that, again, probably finds its way into the fire decks and, again, is really useful for some things like Blaziken, Typhlosion, Delphox, these all have like 2 retreat costs, even some Charizards have higher retreat costs. Ninetales will find its way into there, obviously, but can then also be really useful at giving free retreat to Pokemon if they have like Rainbow Energies and stuff like that attached to them. So it's like a Dodrio, and it means that you can have that within a stage 1 line, which is already like super valuable and interesting already with lots of versatility. So I'm a big fan of this Ninetales. It's gone straight into my standard evolution cube, and I'm pretty sure it's going to stay there for a while. It's even got a 2 for 60 attack, which is just good tempo, good pressure if you want it to be, and it gives itself free retreat as well if you're paying the cost for Flametail. So yeah, really, really nice ability to a line that I've basically stuck with the entire time I've had my standard evolution cube. Electrode's also a pretty popular lightning type. I think Raichu is also a super popular one. A few other lightning types out there as well. But Electrode seems interesting. The new Electrode can do 120 for 1, which sounds like super scary, but of course you're knocking yourself out with the Electrode. Even 1 for 40 on a colorless attack cost makes it really, really splashable and really good tempo as well. So I think this could make its way even just in like mid power as is. Just trading a 1 for 1 would be like pretty interesting actually to see that interaction going ahead. I think for the most part we've seen these sorts of explosion style effects and they've been like too high of an energy attack cost to be worthwhile. Whereas this Electrode literally just you set up 1 stage 1, it's got that colorless attack cost and you can just 1 for 1 something. That seems really, really good to me. So I think this could find its way into mid. Electrode is super interesting as well. I even like having this aggressive, swift, free retreating 90 hit point Pokemon. So it fits an attacking Electrode line, which makes it more interesting than just having like a couple Magnetic Draw and a couple Buzzap Thunders, because these can end up being like the dregs of piles because, you know, drawing up to 4 isn't that strong. It's a nice like disruption prevention, but it doesn't draw as many cards as like Octilleries and that sort of thing, and obviously backup, those sorts of bread and butter stage 1s that you want to have in play. You use Magnetic Draw very few times a game, really, unless you're playing heavy discard synergy style things. And normally I find these like the last pick of the bunch in terms of like, I'm panicking, I have no other Pokemon draw, let's put these in. Whereas these Electrodes are really nice for acceleration, but also having an attacking presence in here seems really cool. And like I said, the explosion seems just like worth it to me in a lot of situations. If 120 is a threshold that deals with at least other stage 1s, and potentially some of the like smaller stage 2s in the draft, it could be really, really interesting. So yeah, I think this Electrode could adapt the archetype, well, adapt the stage 1 to be more viable, especially because there's some great Voltorbs as well to take advantage of. Musharna is interesting, again, pretty much known for its Forewarn, and most people just try and like double up on Forewarn more, maybe, and just ignore the rest. But Musharna is starting to get a few better attacking options. Again, we had one from Sword and Shield base, and now an addition from this set. 120 hit points is a really good benchmark for stage 1s in sort of mid-high power, and Psychic doing a 30 plus for each energy they have attached can really pressurize some tankier like 3 energy attachment Pokemon, as well as being like a decent 2-shot into even efficient Pokemon where you're doing that sort of 60 to 90 range. That seems very interesting, and even Sleep Inducer for dragging up Pokemon and sending them to sleep gives you some high roll. And it has synergy with some of the other Musharnas here as well, which can do more stuff when it's asleep or its opponent's active is asleep. So that's really cool. I can see Musharna being a really nice stage 1. If you go like double Forewarn, then just like one of each of these attacking Musharnas, then you become a really nice option. And I've struggled for stage 1 psychic types before. I've even had like double stage 2 psychic types in my draft before for like high power, because I've not found that stopgap where I have a good enough stage 1. Things like Miss Magius is great for like mid-low power, but Musharna's starting to make that push towards the mid-high, which I think is really, really good. And it's going to be something that I'm going to experiment with, like the double forewarn and one of each of these attacking Mashana, the modern ones. They seem really cool because even having long distance hypnosis can be a great defensive option for you in the opening turns if you're going to be a slower setup deck, just trying to get towards that forewarn in the first place. And they have the upside of synergizing with their evolutions, so they seem like good cards to incorporate. Be aware of the Future Sight Munna. I know a lot of people are scared of putting things like Future Sight Ralts into their draft because it can ruin people's days. So just something to bear in mind. Don't sleep on Future Sight. It's busted in Cube, especially if your opponent starts slowly, or you can trap them with disruption style cards. That could add a whole new element to the Munna if you want it in there, but also just be afraid of it, to be honest. But yeah, I'm happy to see that Mashana is getting a bit more love. It's normally things like Bronzong that you see, or like I said, Miss Magius can be in there. I typically, in higher power, just go straight to Espeon and just have an evolution package and just let that do the work. But yeah, not a bad option now in sort of higher power cubes as a stage 1 psychic Pokemon. Gliscor, also a really interesting mid-power fighting Pokemon. I think this is solidly below Donphan, but oftentimes above Lucario, unless you get crazy with Lucario. Lucario is a really interesting one, actually, because you can go in all sorts of different directions, whereas Gliscor is more sort of channeled into what it can be, but getting another one that has a slightly higher threshold of hit points in the first place is pretty nice, and having an option to hit 110 is a real good sweet spot for opposing stage 1s, even in mid-power. So I do like this Gliscor being an option, especially because it feels like when you play Gliscor, this guy sort of opens up the option for you to be like a heavy Gliscor deck, rather than like a Gliscor package that goes into decks and he just becomes a cameo style Pokemon because Shoot Poison's a great power. Having a 3 energy attack with a Venomous Hit, doing 100 plus poison, and if you play like Verbank and other synergies here, you could be dealing potentially even more damage, like Seviper and whatnot. That could be a really interesting option because now you could be playing things like Gliscor Regirock and have like Stark Mountain and all these other plays. You could be a much lower to the ground option, and I think it's, in general, Gliscor is probably like more fun than Donphan. I think Donphan's just like big and dumb, and hit and run is kind of interesting, but here and there it's can be like frustrating for people to play against. And status is equally like annoying to deal with sometimes, and obviously you have to be worried about paralysis and how much people can use that effect. But having Gliscor in here, the new Gliscor, as an option that's like independently strong and does good damage, and for a higher cost as well, it means that you can be doing good chip damage with some of these lower energy and 0 energy attack costing Gliscors, knowing that you're still building towards the back, and it makes Gliscor more of a standalone card, like I said, rather than having to like either just have him as a bit part player, or completely build around him and try and have like a ton of bouncing effects. Now the Gliscor can just be like standalone good as a stage 1, and I think that's an interesting prospect. I'd love us to randomly somehow get a draw Gliscor. I think that's something that's lacking in the stage 1 support department. They normally become aggressive attackers, like Donphan and Lucario. They're sort of pigeonholed in that regard, but Gliscor does stand out and is certainly an interesting one. The one thing I will note is that it doesn't quite fit in with the other power level. We have the what's this, Guardians Rising, as well as this new Gliscor, which are heading towards that higher threshold, and then we still have these 90-80 hit point style stage 1s, which aren't quite there. So maybe we just have to wait to get 1 or 2 more Gliscors released, and then we can finally move this up in power level to a different style of cube, and then we have 2 branches open where you can have Gliscor in the mid-low, but then also Gliscor in the mid-high, rather than bundling them all in. So it might be one that we continue to be patient on, but I'm really happy to see this guy with that Venomous Hit. Mandibuzz, also a really intriguing one. One of the sort of like newer Pokemon, obviously. So we've got a ton of more modern cards here, mostly in an attacking sense, but they all have interesting text on them. Lots of sniping potential, but it's not just sort of given to you on a platter. You have to either set up some damage, or in this case, they need to have like an ability on them, or you need to pay to do your 60 by discarding items from hand, which isn't always live. So there's some drawbacks here, and it's a bit more setup required. Kind of reminds me of Gliscor that little bit. And Mandibuzz does sit below, I would say, Zoroark in the power level for the most part. And it's kind of in that card's shadow, in sort of mid-high power. But this Mandibuzz, again, is pretty interesting. 2 for 70 just seems like efficient and good. And the break obviously has a great selling point of getting rid of tools whilst doing great spread effects, and 140 hit points is not bad, even if you're like a fake stage 2. So yeah, I think Mandibuzz is getting there. I like the early pressure that it can provide on these guys. Lots of good flexible spread options. So if that's something you like in the playstyle, Mandibuzz could be interesting. But this is more fringe, I think, for the like playable dark stuff. But it's definitely something I've experimented with in my own cubes. Espeon I've already mentioned when I was talking about Moshana. Absolutely adore Espeon. Actually, absolutely adore the evolution package in general. It gives lots of people lots of flexibility, and you just have a lot of consistency inbuilt with these sorts of cards because of the amount of EVs that have great powers and bodies and abilities and all that good stuff. So yeah, the Espeon is a nice welcome addition. It doesn't seem ridiculously high tempo either. It's basically once your opponent has set up, you can make her punish, which is really nice, similar to Energy Crush that you see here. This time Psychic, which is 10 plus 40 more for each attached to the opponent's active, and that seems really nice. The 20 in Paralysis does scare me that little bit, and it will be frustrating to play against, but the damage output is low enough that I don't think it's like a huge problem. So I think this is another great option for evolutions. I can see it easily going in. I already have these three Espeons actually in my own cube on the slide, and I can see this being another option. Like I said, I don't always play with an actual stage 1 psychic line. Sometimes I just lean into these EVs instead and just have like a thicken or like an emphasis on Espeon, so people are naturally tending towards this as an EV package in psychic based decks. So just another one in the toolbox for the evolutions. An interesting basic actually is Latias, and obviously this is really good in standard alongside Mew. But Red Assist being an option to power up Latios made me think of like a little basic package that you can think about. I'm always thinking about basics in Cube, of course, and some people like incorporating mini intersynergies within basics, and I think the Latis have had that before. With previous like EXs and deltas that go on with some of these previous ones, where they synergize with each other, give themselves free retreat, give themselves all this other stuff, which is kind of nice. Here you're giving the Latios acceleration, and obviously the Latios from this set is way too good because it just hits too much. But this Latias only hits 70 for 3, which is like a mid-power style card, a decent-sized basic as well, so something that I would certainly draft myself. But powering up the Latios from previous years could be pretty interesting. The Gold Star actually seems very dangerous, where you can do a big blow up of 150 damage, but you do have to discard 3 strange colored energy onto one another. But having Red Assist, having like Holland's Pokemon could make that work, and it could be a really interesting option, especially with the double resist that it boasts. That's pretty nice, even though it has low hit points, but it could be a big sort of swing in a game style option. When then you also have Breakthrough Lagoon Flights. What I like is these damage thresholds aren't super high that these get out of control, but the Latias just helps you get Latios on the board faster and makes these high energy and awkward energy attack costs that look that little bit better. So if we want to have, some people have like SP packages in their cubes and this, that, and the other. I think having some synergistic basics sort of going on in here could be pretty interesting, especially because a lot of these aren't even hitting for weakness. If you lean into the dragon types that little bit more and the colorless types, they sort of stay out of the weakness maps and the weakness triangle, which I think is always a good thing to bear in mind when you are drafting. So yeah. On to some mutant considerations then. I've gone over what I would consider to be some of the like more popular stage 1 and 2 lines to see how they're adapting, but now just looking at cards as they are and just saying, hey, this could end up in Mutant. Metal basics are actually blessed because they have all the Jirachis already, but Klefki is nice. Just a 10 draw 2 isn't bad on a colorless cost. We have Gramble, which can just randomly get some tools back, which is never a bad thing if you're in a slightly higher power Mutant. I think most of these are geared to higher power mutants nowadays. That's just how cards are printed, the hit points that they have, the damage that they can deal sometimes. In general, just really leans towards higher power mutant, and I think mutant naturally becomes higher power unless you really are trying to stamp it down and stick to like older cards. So most of these are looking with the eye of higher power. So Gramble's just a nice stopgap card that can give you some extra benefit by getting tools back. Simi Sage, again, just like a launch pad card, but nice to have a return to do a little bit of poke damage, but also draw you some cards whilst you're trying to work towards your higher evolutions. Sandslash, similar deal. You can get cards back from the discard, which is always a great get out of jail free option if you've happened to like discard a card that you didn't want to, if your opponent's done that to you, or if you're just light on resources in general, this could be a nice option. And I always like these sorts of cards in Mutant, where it's not like this card is good enough to like build around in Standard unless you're like a fairly mid-low power. But if you're just playing Mutant, having this option will sometimes come up and it'll bail you out of a terrible situation. And put you back into the game, and then you can simply evolve into something else that then is actually relevant from then on. And then some really powerful water stuff, actually. I'd be kind of concerned about the Cloister. I think this is actually maybe too good even for high power cube. This thing looks absolutely insane. It's a 160 hit point Pokemon, essentially, with that inbuilt reduction of 30, and you do 60, 30, 30. I'm actually scared. Like, this is the highest power level stage 1 I could basically think of. This is like way better than like Donphan Prime or something like that. This is ridiculous high priority. 60, 30, 30 is such good numbers as well, because you threaten so many Pokemon at once. You're threatening so many evolving basics on the bench whilst doing like meaningful damage active. That card scares the hell out of me. I even considered not putting it on this slide, but if you're playing very high power level Mutant, this guy is super interesting. And Clawitzer just doing a 50 snipe as well, targeted for 1 attachment, is a really nice, again, like launch pad while you get towards those high evolution pieces. So also another interesting option. Finally, then, we have some reprint cards. I know some people like to go full singleton. Some people like to do like the half singleton thing, where if it's an individual artwork, you're allowed to put it in. So I thought I'd just mention reprints. It's something that I've looked at before, where I'll sneak in an extra quick ball whenever there's a new print of quick ball. So you're basically cheating the artwork. It's an individual card, I guess. But yeah, Judge, Bugcatcher, Shauna, these aren't setting the world alight, but they're nice to pad out your supporter spaces. And same thing for Quick Ball. You can't have enough cards like Quick Ball in Cube. They're just really nice cards to have. So that is it. Let me know what you thought about this Cube review. I'm hoping to do this for every new set release nowadays. I'm going to do one for Cube, for Gym Leader Challenge format, and for Expanded as well. So let me know how this went. If you'd like me to do it in any way differently in the future, I'll certainly consider it. So let me know down below. If you're not super involved in Cube just yet, there's a few good things to bear in mind. There's a Discord where you can get involved in drafting. There's a Facebook page all about Cube discussions and whatnot. And Cube Koga is by far the best resource for Cube out there. It has all sorts on here, all sorts of other people's cubes that you can look over, including my own. Lots of content on here as well, links to all sorts of helpful places as you go. It's my favorite place to search on the internet, basically. So yeah, hope you did enjoy the review, and I'll see you very soon for another Fusion Strike review of some of your other favorite fun formats. Cheers.